Hello everyone, welcome to FineReport Advanced Learning tutorial. So in today's lesson, we were using a couple more examples to explaining the FineReport hierarchical cell index and cell indexing. So in today's lesson, we will have two parts. The first part is going to be hierarchical cell index. So in this part, we'll explain a couple equations which will be used in the section 2, hierarchical cell indexing. So let's take a look at section 1. So for the hierarchical cell index, we'll have two situations, the relative cell index and also the absolute cell index. So for the relative cell index, which means the index will relatively move either forward or backward. So that's a basic idea for relative cell index. So very first, in the designer, we're going to add a formula to get an array of numbers from 1 to 5. So in here, we're using the formula range 5. So what this means is we're going to get an array of number from 1 to 5. You can also see the description on the right side. So let's do a check for the formula. Alright, so that's going to be for A1. And also we're going to let the 1 to 5, the numbers expanding in the vertical direction. So here we have to change this. So next we're going to insert a formula in B1, which is our hierarchical cell index. So A1 square bracket, A1 column -1. So what this formula means is that we're going to get every last value from A1 in B1. Alright, so next we're going to give it a little format and also save it. Save it as relative cell index. So ideally for A1, we will have the first column, we will have the array from 1 to 5, and also for B, we will have an array from 1 to 4 because we're getting every last value from A. Yep, so that's going to be the ideal result. So next, let's take a look at another example. So next, we're going to adjust the formula in B1 a little bit, making the -2 plus. So in this way, all the value from B1 will actually shift up. So we're getting every next value from A1. So ideally, we should see, 2 to 5, because we're getting every last next value from A1. Alright, so that's pretty much for the relative cell index. So next, let's take a look at the absolute cell index. So different from the first one, we will get the absolute location value in the data column. So that's the idea for absolute cell index. So very first, I'm gonna write an equation for A1. And still we're gonna use range 5 to get an array of 5. So next we're gonna enter the absolute cell index for B1 and also for A1. Don't forget to let the A1 expanding in the vertical direction. So next we're gonna insert a formula in B1. So for this formula we will write is equal to A1 square brackets A1 column 3. So what this formula actually means is we're gonna get the third value from the dataset A1. So that's the meaning of this equation. So next we're gonna change the left parent cell of B1 to none. So in this way the B1 wouldn't expanding according to the parent cell. Instead, it will just follow the rules inside the formula, which will get their value of A1. So let's save it first still. So if we hit the preview, we should get the third value. Yep. So that's the idea for the absolute cell index. So next, we're going to take a look at the different formula from the absolute cell index. So in here, we'll want to get the last value from A1. So we're going to change to exclamation point, -1. So what this formula means is that we're gonna get the last value from A1, and I believe which is 5. So this time let's do a little adjusting for the format. Alright, so now let's preview it. Yep, so what we get is the last value from the array of range 5, which is 5. So next, let's take a look at some of the useful formula for the cell indexing. And you can see the expression, description, and the example. So the first one is actually means acquire all the expansion value of the cell, which is A1 from the example. And the second one is still acquire all the expansion value from A1, but with the condition. And the third one is to acquire the position of each expansion value. And the first one is to acquire the current cell value. So for example, is the current cell value of A1. And the next, we're gonna use this 4 formula to make different examples to show you guys for the better understanding. Alright, so now let's take a look at the actual examples. So next, let's learn the first formula, which is acquire all the values. So still, we're gonna use range 5 to get an array of 1 to 5 from A1. And also in B1, we're gonna insert the first formula, which is equal to A1 square brackets exclamation point 0. So what this formula means is that we're gonna acquire all the values from A1 in B1. And for A1, let's expanding the value vertically. And the next, we're gonna set the default left-hand cell to none for B1. So in this way, B1 wouldn't expand. So instead, ideally, we will have every value inside one cell of B1. So still, we're gonna save it really fast. So what this formula will eventually showing us is that we have on the left column, we'll have 1, 2, 5 expanding vertically, and also we'll have 1, 2, 5 within one cell in B1. Because for B1, we apply all the value using that formula. So let's take a look at the final result. So as you can see, we have 1, 2, 5, all 5 values from A1. Alright. Next, let's take a look at the second formula, which is still acquire all the value, but with the condition. So in here, we have to adjust the formula in B1. So we're using the curly braces here. A1 exclamation point equals to 3 curly braces. So what this actually means is acquire all the value from A1, but without A1 equals to 3. So ideally, we'll have 1, 2, 4, 5, as this shows. So what this means is we have the condition A1 not equal to 3. So next, let's take a look at the third formula. So in here, we'll have to change the A1 from range 2 to 6. So we're getting an array from 2 to 6. Just for recognize, and remember, A1 is still expanding vertically. So for B1, we have to change the whole formula because we're getting acquired position formula, which is AND A1. So what this means, we're gonna get every position order number from A1. And in here, we're gonna let the B1's parent cell to default, which is A1. So in this way, the number order will expand vertically as A1 expand. So ideally, we will have 2 to 6 from the left, and also the other number from 1 to 5. So that's the position number. Alright. So next, let's take a look at the last formula, which is acquire the current value. So in here, we're using the $ A1. So what this means is we're gonna get every current value from A1. So remember, B1 has the left parent cell default A1. So ideally, B1 we're expanding as A1 expanding, and then we should get the identical number. So as you can see, we have every current value from A1. So that's everything for the for useful formula. So next, let's enter in the hierarchical cell indexing. So that's going to be the real situation for the cell indexing. And then here we have list two examples from the real situation. And we'll go over this one by one. So as you can see from the left, we have the table which indicates the different liabilities and also the comparison from different months, the ratio, and also the proportion from month by month. And also on the right side, we have the liability and also the group cumulative value and also the cross group cumulative value. So we're going to go over this one by one. So open the designer first. I'm going to use FRW English to create our dataset using the asset depth equals growth. So this is all the demo dataset, which will be find available inside the alpha trial version. For today's practice, we're only going to use the data from year 2010. So that's how much data we have. All right, so right now we have the dataset. Next, we're gonna making the table. So we have the months, and also we have the liabilities. And also let's do a comparison. And also let's do a ratio. And I will explaining the comparison, the ratio, and the month by month specifically while we're entering different equations. So right now we're just using the shortcut for the column title writing, and once we're entering the real formula explanation, you are understanding what is the comparison, the ratio. So right now we're gonna use the formula to type for the comparison. So what we have right now is we're gonna use, so B2 is gonna be the liability, and we want to have the current liability minus the first month's liability. So that's going to be the idea for comparison. So next, let's enter in the ratio. So what the ratio means is that we're gonna have the proportion of the current month's liability, which is B2, divided by the sum of every B2. So the liability of current months divided by the average liability of all the months. So next we have the proportion from mass by mass. So what we want is to compare the proportion of liability from current month to last month. So in here we're gonna use the if situation. If the current value of A2, which is the month, is bigger than the first month, we're gonna have this following formula. Because otherwise, if we only compare the first month's liability, we don't have the period months to compare. So B2 minus the last of B2. So this month's liability minus the last month's liability. That's what this means. Divided by the last month's liability, which is B2 square bracket, A2 minus 1. In other words, we're going to have 0. So what we have is the proportion of the difference between 2 months and divided by the last month. And for the first month, we will have 0. So next, let's give it a predefined style. And also for the row 2, we're going to use a different style to make it look better. So next, let's change this font to, let's do Arial. Alright, and also make it the font a little bit bigger. So right now we're pretty much done with this table. All we do is to adjusting a little bit for the format. The main part is the conversion, the ratio, and the month by month, using all the formula that we explained from the last section, the useful formulas. All right, so let's do a final adjusting. And yep, one more step, we have to change the ratio and the proportion to percentage. So remember, that's important because what we want to show is accurate. And all of these are actually in the percentage. So right now we're pretty much done with the first table making. And let's call this one example. And let's hit the preview button, see the final result. Alright, so in here, the comparison is going to be the liability compared to the first liability. The difference, the ratio, is going to be the liability divided by the sum of the total liability. And also, the month by month is the liability difference divided by the last month's liability. So that's everything for the first one. So next, let's take a look at the second example on the right side. So what we want to show is a different situation of the cumulative value of the liability. So we have the within group, which is different years, liability, cumulative, and also the cross group, the general cumulative value of the liability. So very first, we're going to open the designer and created our datasets. Still, we're going to use the asset debt equity growth as the example hero. And for this one, we're gonna use year 2010 and 2011 as the this practice example. So where year equals to 2010 or year equals to 2011. So let's preview the data. All right. So very first, let's making the main body of this report. So in here, we're gonna starting making the different titles of this report. We have the year, also the month, and also the liability. All right, so for D1 and E1, we will have different cumulative value of the liability. So that's going to be the major important thing for this example. So for D1, ideally, we will have the within the group cumulative value. So what this means is going to have the liability value cumulatively added one by one from order, but within the group, which is year as the group. And also for E1, we will have the title of cross group cumulative value of the liabilities. So what this means is that, for example, for E2, E3, E4, E5, we'll have different months liability add on as cumulative, and also all the way to 2011. So that's the idea. So next, let's drag the year and the month to the corresponding cell. And also let's merge this area of the cell. So what we want to show in the A3 till C3, the merge cell, is to count how many months which has the liability bigger than 15. So in here, we're going to use a count equation in the future. And really, what we want to show is to indicate how many months within different year have the liability bigger than 15. All right. So that's going to be the major part of the body. All right. So next step, let's drag the liability to the corresponding C2, and let's write the formula for D2, which is within the group cumulative liability value. So in here, we're going to use the equation equals to the liability of current plus the last month's liability. So D2 square bracket P2 colon minus 1. So that means the last month's C2 value, which is the liability. So we'll take a look at this formula. All right. All right. So next, let's insert the cross group cumulative value for E2. So in here, we want to have the total liability adding no matter 2010 or 2011. So that's why we need to have a if condition formula to judge the condition. So really quick, we want to make sure that the month, if the month is bigger than 1, so if the month for both of the year is bigger than 1, start from second month, we will have the normal procedure. So the normal procedure would be the current month's liability plus last month's liability. So in here, we're gonna insert the C2, the current month's liability, plus E2 square bracket, and also B2 column minus 1. So that's the normal procedure for adding the liability month by month. And also, if the month is smaller or equal to 1, so that specifically is for the month equal to 1, and especially for 2011, we will have the different situation. So in 2011, start from the month 1, we want to have the current liability plus everything, the total sum liability from 2010, the last year. So in here, we want to have the last year, which is A2 column minus 1, and also the last month of 2010. So B2 column exclamation mark minus 1. So that indicates 2010's last month. So let's take a deeper look at this equation. So this is the equation for cross group cumulative value. All right. So very last, we have the count for liability bigger than 15 to do. So next, let's do the one last step to count how many months within 1 year has the liability bigger than number 15. So in here, we're gonna write a count equation really quick. So we want to count all the liability, which is all the C2. So in here, I'm gonna write C2 and also the square quotation bracket exclamation point 0. That means every C2. But also we have the condition with the curly bracket. We want to make sure that the C2 is bigger than 15. And so in here we use to end mark. And also the A2, which is the year, is equal to the current year. So with the dollar sign, we make sure that the A2 is equal to the current year. So that's going to be the condition. Let's check it. And let's zoom in to see the specific condition. So count every liability within this year, count that is bigger than 15, how many months we have. All right. So far we're already done pretty much the main body for this report, and we have to change the liability counting parent cell to A2, so that will expand corresponding to different year, because we want only to have the statistics within different year. So next, we're gonna make the format for this table. So right now I'm just doing a quickly format adjusting and also expanding different columns to show clearly. And let's use a green as well. And then let's make it all centered and I give it a border. And also let's change the front to area. All right. So we're pretty much done with this example making. for the different style of cumulative value. And let's save it for the one last step. Examples 2. Alright. So now let's preview it to see our final result. Alright, so as you can see, we have the whole table, and within the group cumulative value. As you can see, start from the first month of 2010 and 2011, they are all small numbers. That's because for the within group cumulative value, we only count within the group. So start from the first month of 2011, everything start from the beginning. And as you can see, the final numbers. And also on the right side, we have the cross group cumulative, which is for the first month of 2011, as you can see, it's 202, which is already added everything from the payroll one. And also you can see from different liabilities, we have the count of how many months have the over 15 liability. So 6 for 2010 and 9 for 2011. So that's pretty much everything for the hierarchical cell indexing. So thank you guys for watching. We'll see you in the next class.